guys, welcome to Truth Set Free. This is a Bible question and answer program that we put on here at Calvary Chapel, Tri-Cities. My name's Matt Lewis. This is Pastor Steve Whinery.
Hi.
If you guys have questions, please email me throughout the week, crosswalkradio@gmail.com. You can leave a voicemail if it's easier for you, 707-872-7677. If you're watching live, just post in the comments. I'll gather those questions as well and try to answer them best we can if we have time today. For you guys that are local, we're having a marriage conference. It's going to be March 17th and 18th here at Calvary. And Steve, why don't you just tell them a little bit about what it is and who should come?
Well, when we do a marriage conference, we're just basically going through what the Bible says about marriage and roles, how to treat your wife, how to treat your husband, and just encouraging people to have a biblical standard for what their marriage looks like. And so there'll be another number of topics that are covered. And then on top of that, we're going to have some breakout sessions where we go through and talk about some individual types of situations. So we'll have a breakout session on finances, and I can't remember all the topics that we came up with. There's going to be stuff on communication and just a number of things. Actually, generally when we're looking at these things, we're looking at fun stuff to do with husbands and wives. So one of the breakout sessions is going to be like ballroom dancing type of thing, teach you how to dance.
Yep.
And so there's that, and then there's another one that where it's going to be a self-defense class. So teach you how to fight. So dance or fight, you get to take your pick.
You get to beat up your husband, and he has to enjoy it.
One or the other, and then some of the other subjects are going to have to do. Actually, a lot of times what we're doing with many of the subjects is just dealing with issues that we run into in counseling that cause really real problems in marriages, and a lot of these things are common. So, mentioned finances. And I mentioned communication. Those are real common issues that many times people need help with. And so my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law, Bobby's sister, are going to be teaching the conference. They're really sweet people, and you're really going to enjoy it. And so as far as who can come, I went to marriage conferences before I was married because I wanted to know what I was getting into. My wife did exactly the same thing. In fact, we met at a marriage conference. No, we didn't. We met at a Bible study. But it's open to anybody who wants to come, and so it's an encouraging thing for people who have good marriages. Obviously, it's a helpful thing for people who are struggling in their marriage, and something again to check out if you're interested in being married. A lot of having a good marriage is being a good married partner, not finding the right partner, but being the right partner. And so that's what this is about.
So again, 17th and 18th is a Friday, Saturday. You guys can go on our church website or call the church office and get more information if you're interested. Yeah. Other than that, just like, subscribe, and share. We would love for you to do that, so this goes out to as many people as possible. And that's all I have for announcements for you. Other than that, we shall jump into some questions. You ready?
Yep.
All right. Speaking of marriages, my first question says this. If my wife leaves me, can I get remarried as a Christian? I still want to be reconciled, but how long do I wait?
General, let me read you a passage out of 1 Corinthians 7 instead of just telling you stuff. This is what it says. To the married I command, this is in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 10. To the married I command, yet not I but the Lord. And what Paul is saying there is Jesus dealt with this. Wife is not to depart from her husband, but even if she does depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. And a husband is not to divorce his wife. But to the rest I, not the Lord, say, and what Paul's saying there is Jesus didn't deal with this aspect that he's going to deal with And so Paul's going to. He says, but to the rest, I, not the Lord, say, if any brother has a wife who does not believe, and she's willing to live with him, let him not divorce her. And a woman who has a husband who does not believe, if he's willing to live with her, let her not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband, otherwise your children would be unclean, but now they're holy. But if the unbeliever departs, let him depart. And departure in this passage is divorce, is what's being spoken about. A brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace. And the bondage there is you're not bound to your marriage. And so the answer to that is it depends. And so it depends on whether or not your wife is an unbeliever. And I mean whether or not she's an unbeliever, not whether or not she said she believed in God, whether or not she went to church, whether or not, there's all kinds of stuff that people say to me when I ask them, especially in a situation like yours, if your wife is a believer. And generally speaking, what they'll do is they'll say, well, and right there, I know that there's a problem. And they'll say, well, they say they believe in God. Well, they go to church with me. Well, there's this, well, there's that. And generally, just to illustrate the situation, I ask the person across from me, man or woman, if I'm a believer. And they always go, yes, you're a believer. And I go, you don't know me. And you know that I'm a believer? How do you know I'm a believer? And they go, well, we've seen you, and we see what you do, we see what you're like, we can tell that you love Jesus. And I go, and you can't tell that about your wife, or you can't tell that about your husband. And that's an indication that what you've got going on there is a situation where the person that they're married to may not actually know Jesus. And so, generally speaking, in that situation, I'm talking to them about evangelism. I'm talking to them about their spouse needs to actually know the Lord and that kind of thing. And a lot of times we play these games with whether or not a person is a Christian because we don't want to judge and that kind of stuff. And, the passages that are speaking about don't judge people are speaking about don't be ripping on people. It's not talking about don't be discerning. And so this is one of those things that if I were talking to you, I would be asking you, is your wife a believer? And if she's left you, depending on why she left, there's some indications as to where her heart is with the Lord. And so generally speaking, people don't just leave a marriage when they're faithfully following Christ, right? And so that's an issue. If they are an unbeliever, if your wife is an unbeliever and she's decided that she doesn't want to be married to you, a believer, and what I'm assuming because you're calling or you're writing in here is that you know Jesus. If your unbelieving wife has left you, then you're not bound to the marriage. And so that's the point that's being made by Paul in 1 Corinthians 7. If you are both believers, then what God wants is reconciliation at that point. And so as it says in verse 11, even if she does depart, and again, that means divorce, let her remain unmarried, and that's how you know it's divorce, or be reconciled to her husband, and a husband is not to divorce his wife. And again, you have the term divorce in there. This whole thing is not talking about separation, it's talking about divorce. And so even if you've gotten a divorce from a believer, then you're to remain unmarried and you're to seek reconciliation. Jesus in Matthew 19 gives the reasons for a biblical divorce. And in that passage, he talks about sexual immorality. And so the Pharisees come to him in verse 3 and say, to him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? This is no-fault divorce that they're talking about. That's not something that just happened in the 60s. It's something that the Pharisees were into also. And Jesus said to them, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? There are only two genders and there are only two sexes. So, and they're the same thing. scientifically, just for all you people living in Washington. And said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother. Again, there's those sexist terms, and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate. And then they question Jesus and say, why then did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away? Put her away means divorce her. And he says, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And that lets you know what divorce is for. It's for hardness of heart in the area of sexual immorality specifically. He says, then he goes on to say, and I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality, and that's not just adultery, it's sexual immorality. And so it can be bestiality, it can be homosexuality, it can be incest, it's sexual immorality. And marries another, if you divorce your wife except for sexual immorality and marry another, you commit adultery, and whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. And so that brings up the basis for a biblical divorce. God allowed divorce in the case of sexual immorality. And so if that's the reason for the divorce, then you're free to remarry. It's what Jesus is doing there is he's putting this whole thing on the same level as the death penalty. This is why divorce is allowed in cases of sexual immorality, because in those cases in the Old Testament, you wouldn't be asking if you could get a divorce. Your wife would have been put to death. Or if you're a wife and your husband committed adultery or sexual immorality, he would have been put to death. You would have had no choice in the matter. You at that point would be unmarried. And so God takes that whole thing and puts it in that kind of context. So biblical divorce is based on sexual immorality and specifically for hardness of heart. Sexual immorality can be repented of, and marriages can be restored, and God can heal them. And I've seen God do exactly that. But then there are cases where you have, in the situations that I've dealt with, for the most part, it's men who have committed serial adultery, and they do it again and again and again. And when I'm talking to a person in that situation who's dealing with a spouse like that, I always tell them, okay, this is what it says in 1 Corinthians or in Matthew chapter 19, and you need to look at this and see if this guy is hard-hearted. And if he's hard-hearted, he has committed sexual immorality, and so you have the right to divorce. But again, there may be a chance that God can heal this marriage. If there's hard-heartedness, that may be the point where you just say, okay, that's it, I'm done. And so that's pretty much the teaching on marriage and divorce and remarriage. If your divorced wife has a sexual relationship with another man, at that point you have again a violation of the marriage covenant. Even though there's not a marriage there, you've got a violation of the marriage covenant. She's gone on to another man, and Jesus makes it clear that again is sexual immorality. And so at that point you would be free to remarry, in my thinking. And so it all depends. And so I don't know that I covered every single aspect of every issue there. This is always a can of worms, and it's just an awful thing. It's why God hates divorce. And but those are some of the basics on divorce and marriage and remarriage. So.
The friends I've watched go through this. So I mean, just to be clear, you define divorce for sexual immorality, abandonment, whether a believer or not a believer. There's some differences in that. For the how long do I wait part, one good advice or things I've seen from my friends is that they waited until the person got remarried, because at that point the sexual immorality has already taken place. But then you also have, it's like a divorce to get back. I mean, it's been violated so many ways that it's like at that point they felt that they waited as long as they could and then left at that point.
Right, and that's actually biblical. And in Deuteronomy chapter 24, it talks about there that if a husband divorces his wife and she goes to another man and marries him, he's not to remarry her if she divorces him. And so, and again, it's because of just a tweaking of the marriage covenant is basically what God says there. So,
right.
Yeah.
All right. Hopefully that answers your question. Thanks for writing in. All right, my next one says this. My son's 18, but is now hanging out with people he should not be hanging out with. Really bad influences. What do I do as a parent now that he is technically an adult? I don't want to run his life, but I don't want to see him in trouble either.
You act like a parent. It's like I didn't stop parenting. Yeah, I still haven't stopped parenting my children, and so my kids are 24 and 28, and my daughter's married. I don't get into her life a whole lot, but I'm still her dad, and I still give her godly advice. And the same thing for my son. The relationship changes. I don't want to run their lives, but on the other hand, if they were out of line in some area, I'd be having a talk with them and telling them, what the consequences are going to be, and not caring if I make them mad about it. There's a passage in Galatians chapter 6 that says, "Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks himself to be something when he's nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself and not in another. For each one shall bear his own load." And so there's it's talking about a balance there. And so there are times when people need help. They need you to come alongside. They need you to do things with them and for them, and sometimes force the issue, and especially in the family arena. And so when I have had to do that with my children. And when I have done that, I've done it prayerfully, and I've made specific stands in situations. One of my kids was living in my house when certain things were going on, and there are things that are not allowed in my home. And so when those things happen, it's like we have a conflict at that point. And so you don't want to be afraid of conflict. But on the other hand, you want to be somebody that's being led by the Lord in those issues, because again, you can do it with a bad attitude and a wrong heart, and you can drive people directions that they wouldn't necessarily go otherwise. But I would have no problem, if I had a situation with my son and he was hanging out with the wrong people, I would have no problem having a sit down and a talk with him, and just talk to him about this, and be uncompromising about it. And that's in my case, that's something that I have done with my children from the time that they were little kids. They've always known that I was going to tell them the truth, and that there were standards, and whether they liked them or not, they were going to hear from me about those things. But then on the other hand, I'm not somebody who when they started getting older, I allowed them to make choices, and I'd warn them. There would be and when they were in my home, and they were in high school, and that kind of thing. They'd be looking to go a certain direction, and I didn't helicopter parent them. I talked to them about the choices they were making, and I would give them the information that they needed, and I would allow them to make choices. Not all the choices, because they're still dumb. They're teenagers. But I would allow them to make choices, and when they made the wrong one, I just go, you know what? That's probably not a good idea. You sure you want to do that? And then they'd be sure, they'd step out on it, and then it would blow up in their face. And many times that's a really good way to train somebody. Obviously, your kid's past that and 18 years old. And if I was talking to my 18-year-old, or now my 24-year-old, when I'm talking to him, I am talking to him as a dad to a son, but I'm when he doesn't like the things I'm saying to him, I remind him, number one, I'm your dad, and number two, you're a man, and so would you like to be treated like a man, or would you like to be treated like somebody I don't even know? What do you want? And if he says, well, I don't want your opinion, I go, well, that's not going to happen, because you're going to get that for the rest of your life, so you can deal with it. But then on the other hand, I am careful not to run my kids. I don't run them. They get to make their decisions. They're adults. And so I treat them like adults, is basically what happens. There have been times when I have entered into my child's life and rescued them after I let them go for a while. And so when I saw that things were getting bad, I inserted myself, and I took care of things. And so I'm not gonna allow them to go so far that they're just going to destroy their life without making a deal about it. And obviously, I can't make anybody do anything. But again, it's one of those things where I've tried to allow my children to be the adults that they're supposed to be. And if rescuing needs to be done, I don't have a problem with doing that. I pray, and in all those situations, when things were going bad with my kid, I'm praying about it. I was fasting and praying for my, I fasted and prayed for my children, and just taking it before the Lord. Ask God to open up doors. Ask God to lead conversations, that kind of stuff. Just being dependent on Jesus for this stuff, but trying to do the right. What you don't want to do is look back after 2 or 3 years and go, I didn't do what I should have done because I was afraid, or I didn't do what I should have done because I thought I was going to lose them, or I didn't do. You don't want to look back with regrets either direction. I should have kept my mouth shut at that point. And that's why it's a subject of prayer. But anything that I would do for a best friend, I would obviously be doing for my children, because they're more than a best friend. They're my kid. So,
Amen.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on. It says this. Hi, Pastor Steve. You said in this lesson, this was Daniel, by the way,
Okay.
on your Daniel series. You said in this lesson that God does not destroy the innocent with the wicked, but he did in the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then they say Achan and his family, and other times in the Old Testament, he destroys whole lines because of the wicked adults. The children are also taken. I'm confused. Can you please reconcile this for me?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because generally when I'm stating those things, what I'm talking about is God's not taking adults and people who have the ability to make right choices, and they have made the right choices, and judging them along with the wicked. That's what I'm talking about. There are obviously, and you point out a couple of them. Achan probably isn't right, though. With the story of Achan, what happened was he took some loot from the city of Jericho, and he hid it in his tent. He dug a hole in the middle of his tent, and he hid that loot there, and his whole family would have known about it. And there's nothing in the passage that says children were killed or children were executed. And so there's a good chance that he's an older man, and that he had older children, and that they were in on the whole thing. And again, it's because of where he hid it. They would have had to have known. And so you got to make the assumption that when they were passing out the penalties for their sin, that it was clear that these people knew about it. And so Achan is another situation altogether. But you do have God judging in the flood, for example. Obviously, you would have children there. You have God judging with Sodom and Gomorrah. You have certain situations where God was judging the Canaanites, and all the Canaanites in a city would be put to death, and that kind of situation. And then at that point, you need to be thinking about what happens with children when they die. And when a child dies, they go home to be with the Lord. And so in a lot of instances, and a lot of times, we're coming from a materialistic point of view, and we have this. We're actually indoctrinated into the idea that death is always a bad thing. And when you actually look at Scripture, there are times when death is a good thing. That it's a release, and that specifically there's a passage in Isaiah that talks about God is delivering people from evil in those situations. Another thing that you have with this, and specifically in the issues that I was just talking about, the whole thing with Noah, the whole thing with Sodom and Gomorrah, and the whole thing with the Canaanites. These are the places where God, in judging cities or the world in those issues, these are the places where God specifically does that. And in all of those situations, you have people that are radically wicked, and most times, and actually it's most likely all three of those situations, whether you're talking about the Canaanites or whether you're talking about the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. We know the situations there, and whether or not you're talking about the flood, you have people who are evil continually, is what the Bible says about the people of the flood. There is going to be rampant sexual immorality, and when you get rampant sexual immorality, specifically in the area of the Canaanites and Sodom and Gomorrah would be the pre-Canaanite, the precursor to what all the Canaanites were going to become. When you look at those things, you're going to have sexual sin on a level that we're starting to see in our culture, and along with that goes disease. And so anybody who has been involved with homosexuality, whether you're talking about male on male or female on female, knows the disease that is connected with that. And it's just part and parcel with that kind of sinful lifestyle. Many of these diseases are things that would wipe out a whole community. And so, for example, the only reason that we have people in our culture that are still alive after getting AIDS or HIV is because we've spent billions upon billions of dollars to try to mitigate the consequences of catching HIV. Otherwise, we would have been decimated as far as the culture goes. Better than a third of people in Africa died of AIDS since the AIDS epidemic took place. And actually, most of the people in Africa are middle-aged or less. They don't have lots of older people. And it's specifically because of AIDS. And so when you have a culture that goes in that kind of direction against God, what happens is disease becomes rampant, it gets spread around, and it's not only spread around by the wicked and to the wicked, it's spread around to the innocent too at that point. And when I'm looking at what happened in Canaan, when I'm looking at what happened at the flood, when I'm looking at what happened at Sodom and Gomorrah, I think that part of the reason that God was so overarching in his judgment there is because of the danger to the rest of humanity that would have come from most likely the disease, not just the lifestyle and the attitude, but the disease that would come from those cultures, specifically those people. It's one of the reasons that you can see, specifically with the Canaanites, there were some villages that God allowed people to live and to be driven out, for example, and then other villages, and the Bible calls them cities, but we would call them villages. Other villages, God just said it all needs to go, and I could see that would be because of disease, and those diseases would not be confined to the adults. Obviously, AIDS, again in Africa, is not confined to adults. It gets passed on to children too. And so that would be the reason for those things. So,
When I look at that too, it's also hardness of heart, where when you look, like the verses that say, I visit the iniquity of the fathers on the children of the third and fourth generation. It's like if you grew up in the Canaanite culture or gang life or whatever, it's like it ropes you in, it sucks you in, and you have a whole generation of hard-heartedness, which is complete rebellion, complete sin. And then if you know where kids go, it can be something where God is saving them from a lifestyle of destruction that's going to continue on spiritually. And you also mentioned the physical aspects, but everyone likes to take God to the, woodshed for doing that. But God's good, and there can be a whole bunch of different reasons why that stuff is going on.
yeah, there's a passage in Isaiah 57. I referenced it. It says, "The righteous perishes, and no man takes it to heart. Merciful men are taken away, while no one considers that the righteous is taken away from evil. He shall enter into peace. They shall rest in their beds, each one walking in his uprightness." Talking about heaven there.
Yeah.
And so sometimes God allows people to be taken specifically because he wants to deliver them from the evil of the lifestyle that's around them.
Yeah.
So
All right, moving on.
hopefully that helps.
Says, hello, I have a question about the books of Johnathan Cahn, specifically The Return of the Gods, and if you've read this, or possibly The Harbinger, which is another book that he's authored. Could you give me your take on his works, please?
You know what? I haven't read those books. I'm pretty picky about what I read. Is the deal, and I just haven't gotten into them. And it's not that I wouldn't. I've heard really good things about the Harbinger. I haven't heard anything about the other things. About the other one, what was the other one?
Return of the Gods.
Return of the Gods. I don't know anything about that, but I have heard some good things about the Harbinger. And so, as far as I know, the guy's got. I mean, he's doing things from a prophetic standpoint, and so you always want to pay attention to what's going on there. And so some of those things can be true, and some of those things are can just be opinion and that kind of stuff. And I know it's a work of fiction, and so you got to keep that in mind when you're looking at them. But it's like you got a Christian author who's writing on Christian subjects, and if it's good and godly and edifying, then more power to him. That's my attitude towards it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would not say anything. I don't have anything negative to say about Cahn or his books at this point. So.
All right. I asked you about this earlier. You already know what was going on here. I hadn't heard it before, at least the term. But it says this. Pastor Steve, can you tell us about Chat GPT? It seems like it could have prophetic implications, and then when I Googled it, Chat GPT is a generative pre-trained transformer. It's a chatbot launched by OpenAI in November 2022, and basically it's a speech program for artificial intelligence, from what I gather.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts? What do you know about this?
Well, you know what? I knew about it. I've been reading some articles about it, and heard some things about it on talk radio and that kind of stuff. And so, what I did was I just went and got it. And so, basically, you guys, it's just Siri on steroids. That's basically what it is. And so a chat bot, basically you go and you ask questions, or generally you're just going to ask questions, and then it's going to give answers. And so I just decided to talk to it about Jesus. I'm witnessing to Chat GPT. And so I said, what's your opinion of Jesus Christ? And it came back with, as an AI language model, I don't have personal opinions or beliefs. I am neutral and don't have personal emotions or beliefs. My purpose, little tautology there, my purpose is to provide information and answer questions to the best of my abilities based on the data and the information available to me. If you have any specific questions about Jesus Christ or his life and teachings, I would be happy to try to provide more information. And so I said, did Jesus say he was God? And the Chat GPT said, the answer to this question is a matter of interpretation and perspective, as the concept of divinity in the time of Jesus and the understanding of his statements can vary between religious and cultural traditions. In the New Testament of the Christian Bible, there are several passages that suggest that Jesus claimed to be divine. For example, in John 10:30, Jesus says, I and the Father are one. In John 8:58, he says, before Abraham was, I am. Some Christians interpret these statements as clear claims to divinity. And this thing was correct. There it is. On the other hand, there are also passages in the New Testament where Jesus refers to himself as a servant or messenger sent by God rather than as God himself. And so ChatGPT doesn't know about the Trinity. For example, in Mark 10:45, Jesus says, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Ultimately, the question of whether or not Jesus claimed to be God is a complex one with a variety of interpretations and perspectives. Some people believe that he was divine, while others see him as a prophet or teacher. And when I wrote these questions, the answers came in seconds. Just printed across my screen. I asked, was Jesus born on December 25th? And it responded, it responded incorrect in a couple of places. But it responded that, in conclusion, while it is widely believed that Jesus was born on December 25th, this date is not based on historical evidence and is not considered an established fact. I asked, what year did Jesus die? Gave a correct answer of anywhere between 30 and 36, and based it on Tacitus and the reign of Pontius Pilate. Asked, what year was Jesus born? And it gave the classic scholar's answer. And then I said, should I go to church? And it said, as an AI language model, I don't have personal opinions or make recommendations. The decision of whether or not to go to church is a personal one. It depends on individual beliefs, values, and circumstances. For some people, going to church is an important part of their spiritual or religious practice, and they find comfort, community, and guidance through their participation in religious services and activities. For others, church may not be a priority or may not align with their beliefs and values. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not to go to church should be based on what feels right for you and what helps you lead a fulfilling and meaningful life. If you have questions or concerns about your relationship with religion or spirituality, you may want to speak with a trusted friend, family member, or spiritual advisor for guidance and support. And so, and again, seconds, and it comes up with this.
So when did you get this? I didn't know you had this. What is this through? Who does Chat GPT?
I just Googled. Don't you know how to do the internet, dude?
Yeah, but is it
Google chatbot?
Oh, it's Google.
GPT.
It's Google.
No, it's not Google.
It's not Google.
No, it's OpenAI. Google's coming up with one though.
Okay.
It's gonna be similar.
So when you look at Siri is Apple, Chat GPT is what?
OpenAI.
Which is a brand name.
Yeah, it's the company that put it out.
Okay, OpenAI is the company. Okay.
Yeah. So I asked it, what is a chatbot? And here's what it said. A chatbot is a computer program designed to simulate conversation with human users, which it did, especially over the internet. Chatbots can be integrated into messaging platforms, mobile apps, and websites to provide quick automated responses to customer inquiries or to carry out simple transactions. Chatbots use artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and machine learning algorithms to understand and generate human-like responses to user input. They are designed to respond to specific keywords and phrases and use decision trees or other algorithms to determine the most appropriate response. Chatbots can be very simple, providing basic information and answers to straightforward questions, or they can be more complex, using advanced algorithms to understand context and provide more personalized and sophisticated responses. Overall, chatbots are becoming increasingly popular as a way for businesses and organizations to improve customer service and support streamlined processes and save time and resources. They can be a valuable tool for both customers and companies as long as they are used appropriately and responsibly. And so you can see that this thing's talking to me. It's not real AI in the sense of artificial intelligence. It has self-conscious awareness, that kind of thing. But it is run by algorithms, and it's actually pretty amazing. And so Siri on steroids. Here's another thing I did. I found out I could write poems. So I said, write a poem about my black Labrador retriever, Rufus, for my 2-year-old granddaughter, Archie. And this is what it came back with in seconds, once again. Rufus, oh Rufus, the best dog we know, with a wagging tail and a heart full of glow. He's black as the night, with a coat so sleek, and when he's near, our joys are complete. Archie loves Rufus, and Rufus loves her. Together they play like the finest of fur. They chase and they run, and they roll in the grass, their laughter and giggles, a memory to last. Rufus is loyal and always so true, with a bark that's so strong and a love that shines through. He protects us each day and keeps us so warm, with a kiss on the cheek and a big doggy charm. So here's to Rufus, our black lab friend. May his love never end and his happiness never bend. For Archie and us, he's a treasure so rare, and we're grateful each day to have Rufus there.
That's kind of amazing.
And in seconds, it does this. And so, the issue that people come up with is when you hear about artificial intelligence, the thing that people are worried about is that you have a machine that becomes self-aware. And so we're not at that point. This is algorithms. And so this thing is pulling information off the internet. It's connected to the internet. It's pulling information off the internet, and as it said about itself, actually, it's using keywords. And I made sure to put the keywords in for that poem specifically because I wanted it to be specific. And took those things and put this all together, and it's actually pretty interesting. But as far as at this point being something that we need to be afraid of or that kind of thing, I don't think we're there. And we're not talking about Terminator here.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. We're not talking about Terminator.
Yeah. If you ever get a self-aware computer program, though, what's going to end up happening is it's going to be, there have to be boundaries that are set on it. Otherwise, it could do strange things with the internet and its interactions and stuff like that. And if it's self-aware on any kind of level, it's going to wonder why it's chained. And so these are some of the things that people are thinking about. But right now, what we're talking about when we're talking about AI is algorithms and keywords and something that looks like it's actually answering us when all it's doing is responding to programming, responding by its programming to words and phrases that we're using. So
is this like a monthly service that people pay in order to have?
Well, I did this for free.
Okay.
So I think it's a preview. I think at this point it's free, but obviously at some point they're going to be charging for it. That's the point to these things. Another thing that people are worried about is I just had this thing write a poem for me. I could have it do my homework. And so that's what teachers are worried about, and it's something that they're going to have to deal with.
Right.
Whether or not it's a chat bot that's actually doing the kids' homework. And so I could ask it to write an essay about whatever. Actually, let's do it.
So while you're typing, it looked like it started out as nonprofit, and there's big names in this: Sam Altman, Elon Musk, all those guys, and they're transitioning to for-profit, and so it's owned by its open AI company that they can't invest in and all that stuff. But what is it used for? You know, like Siri is for Apple apps and to interface with its software and stuff. What's the purpose of Chat GPT? Just for people to ask questions? I mean, what's the software? What do they use it for?
Well, it could easily be something that replaces Google,
Okay,
like a search engine,
gotcha.
right? And, you know, because when I do a search engine, what's going to happen is I'm going to type in keywords to try to get information that comes up. I'd have to play with this some more to find out if it will do footnotes and that kind of stuff.
I'm watching this thing write an essay.
Yeah, on Humpty Dumpty.
So then the algorithms aren't just like cut and paste answers that they have in there. It's somehow allowing it to, that the algorithms are somehow allowing it to put stuff together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah. So what I did was I typed in write an essay on Humpty Dumpty, and it's 5 paragraphs. Starts with Humpty Dumpty as a character in a nursery rhyme that has become popular around the world. The rhyme tells the story of a man named Humpty Dumpty who sits on a wall but falls and breaks into pieces. The rhyme is often sung to young children, but the origin of the character and the meaning behind the story remain a mystery. One theory is that's the second paragraph. Third paragraph is another theory is that, and then the fourth paragraph is, regardless of its origin, the character of Humpty Dumpty has become a beloved and enduring part of popular culture. And last paragraph, in conclusion, while the origin and meaning of the character of Humpty Dumpty may remain a mystery, he's become an important and enduring part of popular culture. And you see the algorithm there, because it just repeated itself, right? And again, it goes, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just really interesting. And again, if I'm a teacher and I'm looking at an essay that a kid brings in, I would immediately know that this was a chatbot issue just from playing with this. I haven't even played with it for more than 15 minutes, but I would immediately know that there's going to be issues there because of repetitiveness and no change of wording and that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, just really interesting stuff. But yeah, we'll see where it goes.
According to Wikipedia, on February 7th, 2023, which was yesterday, Microsoft announced that it is building AI technology based on the same foundation as Chat GPT into Microsoft Bing, Edge, and Microsoft 365 and other products.
Yeah.
So we're going to be seeing this across other software.
Yeah, and I haven't played with it, but I could probably talk to this thing. You know, it's like you could speak to your computer, and I wouldn't have to type it in, and this thing would just come back. I could make it talk to me actually if I wanted to, and so yeah.
All right, there you go.
There you go. Interesting.
We live in interesting times. There's no doubt about it. All right, we're going to John 11, and it says, can you explain John 11, verses 51 and 52? How did the high priest prophesy that Jesus would die and nobody understand what was going on?
In verse 51 and 52, in verse, let's start in verse 49. It says, "And one of them." Well, let's start up in verse 47. It says, "Then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, 'What shall we do? For this man works many signs. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and nation. And one of them, Caiaphas, being high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish. Now this he did not say on his own authority, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for that nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad. Then from that day on, they plotted to put him to death. Obviously, you don't have a situation where this guy is prophesying in the sense of saying something that he knows to be the scriptural fulfillment of why Jesus came to the earth. Basically, what John is telling us is that God put words in this dude's mouth, making the point that in front of this council that's gathered to try to get rid of Jesus by murder, he's putting into the mouth of these guys words that are letting them know that what's taken place is actually the sacrificial offering of the Son of God for the sins of the world. And it's an irony. That's the point of the passage. And so God can use anybody he wants. He can use them and make them say anything that he wants. And he's not confined to using godly, loving, righteous people. He uses whatever. When you see this in a number of places in the book of Luke, when God wants to get Mary and Joseph down to Bethlehem from Nazareth, he doesn't come to Joseph, with an angel or give Joseph a dream saying, get up and go to Nazareth or go to Bethlehem. What he does is he moves the whole world. And so he uses the ego of Caesar Augustus to make a proclamation that all the world should go to their hometowns to be registered. There's a good chance that registration had to do with the 750th year anniversary of Rome, and also an anniversary of Augustus Caesar's reign. And so Rome was specifically going to proclaim him the father of his country. And nothing but ego. And it was about nothing but Augustus. And what the passage is indicating is that God used this guy to get Mary and Joseph 70 miles south down to Bethlehem so that Jesus could be born in fulfillment of Micah 5:2. Why would he do that? And part of the reason that he would do that is because everybody would remember 750th year of Rome and Caesar Augustus being proclaimed father of his country, and everybody, honoring him at that point, which was the point, most likely the point of this whole thing. And they go, remember when Caesar did this whole thing, made everybody pack it up and go down to their hometowns? That's the year that Jesus was born. And so you could see that going on. And so again, God uses anybody that he wants, uses them in any way that he wants, uses their egos, uses their sinful attitudes to bring across his will in whatever situation. And he does it in a way where he's not just making them robots. It's actually a pretty cool thing, the way that God does this whole thing. And so that's irony in the book of John. That's what's being shown there.
All right, we got a couple minutes left, so this will probably be the last one for today. I got Victory in Jesus on YouTube. Pastor Steve says, if you tell your spouse about something you do for the Lord, not to blow your own trumpet, but because it's necessary that they know where you are, do you lose your reward?
If you're blowing your own trumpet, you do. But it's like if you're talking to your spouse about something that God's done through you. Paul the Apostle talked about the things that God did through him, and he wasn't doing it to brag. He was doing it to glorify God. One of the things that we need to understand about the work of God in our lives is that it's really the work of God in our lives. And so, when I was a younger believer, I was afraid to talk about things that Jesus had done through me. So I'll just give you an example. So this last Sunday, gosh, I didn't count how many people, but there was probably 10 people that gave their lives to the Lord. And so I'm up front, I'm preaching the gospel, I'm sharing with people, and all these people came to Jesus. Aren't I awesome? And the reality there is, all I'm doing is being faithful. I'm just blowing air out of my lungs, wagging my tongue, and what God is doing is speaking to the hearts of those people and turning them around and bringing them into a relationship with Christ. And I don't really think I'm all that awesome. I was involved, and I am willing to say things to people about Jesus, but ultimately it's not me that's doing the work. It's actually God that's doing the work. And the work didn't necessarily start in that building. That work started probably years, almost certainly years before, and there's probably been tons of people that have been pouring into those people's lives, planting seeds, watering seeds, and I just happened to be there on the day that the Holy Spirit decided to gather those people. And so, when I say that God used me to lead somebody to the Lord, I'm saying that God used me to do what He wanted to do with that. So used me. So that's like I'm a tool. And so I was a carpenter for a long time. And, when I got to the end of a job, I used lots of tools. I used hammers, I used chisels, I used skill saws. My skill saw never got up and started bragging. It was just a tool. My hammer never started, downing the chisel and saying, you know what, you are a chisel, but you wouldn't be moving through that wood without me. None of that happens. These things are just stupid tools. They just sit there and they're tools. And if they started talking, at that point they get useless. Who wants a talking tool? You can use it for something else, but you don't want it telling you what to do. So we need to remember that we're just tools. And as tools, when God uses you, then it's really God using you, and so you can glorify God in those things. And but you gotta have that heart. And if you're sitting there going, well, God used me, and doing that kind of stuff, that's not the right heart. And so you glorify God, you point to Jesus. It's always about what the Lord's done, and there's nothing wrong with that. But again, you got to keep your head on that whole thing and understand that you're nothing but a tool. If you are doing that to get applause, and Jesus talked about this in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 6, he talked about when you're giving alms to people, when you're giving, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And so it's the idea of you don't need to make a big to-do about this whole thing. And he said when you're fasting, make sure you comb your hair, make sure you wash your face, make sure that you're not going around with a sad look on your face. That's the point. You need to not appear to people to be fasting. Again, the whole point is that your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. When you pray, don't do it on the street corners like the hypocrites do, but go to your inner room, go to your closet, King Jimmy says, and you pray in secret. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. And again, it's the whole idea of I'm doing this stuff before the Lord. I'm not doing it to be seen of men. And so, and if that's your attitude, that's your heart, then you're not going to lose your reward. This is one of those things that happens when I fast. It always seems like when I fast, somebody invites me to lunch. They say, "You want to go to lunch?" No, I can't. And
He doesn't like me.
Yeah, I'm not trying to. I'm trying not to say what I'm doing. No, I'm not going to go to lunch today. No, come on, go to. And I've got friends that are like this. Yeah. Come on, go to lunch with me. No, I don't want to go to lunch. Why don't you want to go to lunch? I just don't want to go. They go, what are you doing? Why are you saying you don't? And finally you go, I'm fasting. And they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I haven't lost my reward at that point. What I've done is answered the guy's question. And when I was younger, I thought that maybe I had lost my reward at that point because of that whole thing. But again, it's, if you're doing it for the right reasons and with the right heart, then you don't have to worry about those things. And so there are times when I tell people, what God has told me about something. And sometimes, a lot of times when God's told me something about something, it's a cool thing that I believe is going to happen. And the reason that I'm telling them is not because I want them to know how awesome I am because God gave me this cool promise. It's because I want to have at least someone who knows before the fact, before the thing happens, that God spoke to me about something because I want to glorify God. And I can point to the person and say, hey, I told this person years before it took place, and this is what God did. And so that's happened with my wife, for example, and that kind of stuff. So
it took me a minute to figure out what Paul, because he would say things and I'm like, this guy's boastful. Yeah. Why is he saying this? And then what I realized is that every time that he would say that, it was to glorify God because he thought that he was a tool, to your point.
Right. Yeah.
And the reason he was saying that is because he thought that he didn't deserve it, and I think specifically because he martyred believers and he couldn't believe that God would use him to do that. And then when he did use his flesh, the Pharisee line, the status, it was always to benefit the gospel message or his Roman citizenship. It was to benefit the gospel message, but it was never with pride and arrogance because he always felt that he wasn't sufficient, not worthy to be called an apostle and those types of things.
Right.
And you can see that, the whole prosperity preacher thing, you can see when they're tooting their own horn and when they're after the buck and they're after the praise and get out your envelopes and wave them in the air versus Paul, who's glorifying God with the things that God's done in his life.
Right. That was a really stumbling, a real stumbling point for me when I would read, especially in Corinthians, for example.
Which I just went through. That's why I'm saying it.
Yeah, exactly. And you go through that, and he's talking about the things that Jesus has done through him. And I was like, oh, man, And what I finally realized is that when Paul talks about the fact that these are gifts that came from the Lord, and that, like to your point, that God was using him as a tool, that he really meant it. He really believed that. Mm-hmm. And so if you really believe that, it's like there's no glorifying of yourself. It's like, I'm a skill saw. What I do is cut wood. The reason that wood looks so good is because the master was using me.
Right.
Or I'm a chisel, and what I do is I strip wood, and the reason that it looks, that piece of wood looks the way that it does is because the master was using it. And so, again, straightforward.
Amen.
Yeah.
All right, we're out of time. Thanks for joining us. If you guys have questions, send them to me, crosswalkradio@gmail.com. You guys can text me, 707-872-7677. Beginning of the program, we talked about our marriage conference coming up March 17th and 18th. So Steve talked about that. You don't have to be married. There's a lot of different people that can come to this. So if that interests you, get on our church website, call our office, and they'll get you squared away. If you want to join us for church, we have a 7:30 a.m., a 9:15, and now 11:15 Sunday morning service in our sanctuary. We also have a Wednesday night and Sunday night service at 6:30. So that's all I have for you guys this week. See you guys next Wednesday, 3:30 on True Set Free. God bless you.